Okay, this is, of course, our first ever commentary on a hymn, which I have chosen. Actually, it is no particular thing. This just happens to be one of my favorite hymns, and we being in the middle of Lent, and very shortly before Easter, but we will be very close on Easter indeed, around the time of Good Friday and so on. Well, anyway, the hymn that I have chosen, once again, I'm flying by the seat of my pants because we have not done this before, and I'm very grateful to Tom Demer. He happened to be up at the church when I was looking over all of this material, and he kind of knows how to do all of this. So we are going to try to do this tonight, once again, very much improvised. This is the hymn that I chose for this, is Beneath the Cross of Jesus. I'm going to just give you an idea of some of the words and so on. It is by a woman, a poetess, Scottish, as a matter of fact, Elizabeth C. Clephane. Her full name is Elizabeth Cecilia Douglas. She's part of the Douglas clan. She was Scottish. Clephane is her name. She was born 18 June 1830, died 19 February 1869. So she was only 39 years old when she died. A Scottish songwriter. She wrote actually a number of hymns. 8 hymns in particular were published posthumously in the Family Treasury, a Presbyterian magazine, between 1872 and 1874. After her death, her hymns were promoted in America by Ira D. Sankey, who actually was associated also with a traveling evangelist by the name of Moody, who actually wrote a tune to accompany one of her particular hymns. The one that I have chosen here, Beneath the Cross of Jesus, is often heard around Easter time and is usually sung to the tune of St. Christopher by English organist Frederick Charles Maker. I'll say something about him too. However, she is very famous, apparently, in certain circles. I was talking to a friend of mine who is a Methodist minister about this hymn only last week, as a matter of fact, that we don't necessarily do that much anymore, but it's called the 90 and 9. But the one that we're going to talk about today is Beneath the Cross of Jesus. Clephane was born at West Circus Place in Edinburgh, Scotland. My friend actually has his doctorate from the University of Edinburgh. The third daughter of Andrew Douglas Clephane, an advocate and the sheriff of Fife. His wife, Anna Maria Douglas, the daughter of Lieutenant Colonel Robert Douglas and Anna Maria Ashton Hurst. So quite an elaborate pedigree here. She is, of course, Scottish. She died in Melrose in Roxburghshire in 1869. She had a kind of a frail existence. She gave very much to the relief of the poor, and it is said that she sold her horses to raise money for philanthropic causes. And I have a picture of her. Her grave is with her parents' graves in St. Cuthbert's Churchyard in central Edinburgh. There's a memorial brass plaque to Clephane at Melrose Abbey. Here is the hymn that we're actually looking at. I know this from my youth, as a matter of fact, but it was published in about 1875. Beneath the cross of Jesus, I fain would take my stand, the shadow of a mighty rock within a weary land, a home within the wilderness, a rest upon the way from the burning of the noontide heat and the burden of the day. There are 5 stanzas to this. Most of the time we only sing 3. There are 3 in the Presbyterian hymnal right now. The second verse is, O safe and happy shelter, O refuge tried and sweet, O trysting place where heaven's love. And I believe that has been changed a little bit in the Presbyterian hymnal, perhaps. I don't know. Well, anyway. And to the Holy Patriarch that wondrous dream was given, so is my Savior by the cross a ladder up to heaven. That is one verse that actually is not in our hymnal. The third verse, there lies beneath its shadow, but on the farther side, the darkness of an awful grave that gapes both deep and wide. And there between us stands the cross, 2 arms outstretched to save, like a watchman set to guard the way from that eternal grave. This particular verse also, I think, is not usually done. It is actually, we think that perhaps, according to Wikipedia at least, that actually this was inspired by her frailness and the fact that in fact she was facing her own death. And so that verse actually is not always done. Now, the second verse actually in our Presbyterian hymnal is actually the fourth in my little commentary here. Upon that cross of Jesus, mine eye at times can see the very dying form of one who suffered there for me. And from my smitten heart with tears 2 wonders I confess, the wonders of his glorious love and my own worthlessness. And actually worthlessness, I believe, is here in our Presbyterian hymnal changed to my unworthiness. And the third verse, I take, O cross, thy shadow for my abiding place. I ask no other sunshine than the sunshine of his face. Content to let the world go by, to know no gain nor loss, my sinful self, my only shame, my glory, all the cross. Those are the words. It was published in 1875, as I mentioned, in a Presbyterian magazine. The music in this particular case was composed by a Bristol, England musician, Frederick C. Maker, 1844 to 1927. I don't have yet a picture of him, but I do have a picture of where he worked. And here is what the melody is like. Now, I'm going to tell you something about this. If you actually open your Presbyterian hymnal, you'll see that down at the bottom of the page, there's a little comment, as a matter of fact, about the text. For sheer intensity of feeling, few hymns can match this meditation on the cross. Impressive images and strong contrasts combine to give the text its ardor. The passionate language is augmented by the highly chromatic later composed for these words. And this, of course, is the tune that we're talking about by Frederick Charles Maker, which was about 1881. So it's fairly early poem being published actually after her death in about 1875. It's only a few years later. These tunes are very often assigned names. This particular one, I don't know how these names are arrived at. I'll have to do some research on that. This is called St. Christopher. And you see under the St. Christopher, if this is, by the way, 216 in the Presbyterian hymnal, you see the numbers down at the bottom, 76868686. And if you were to look that up in the back of the hymnal, you would find a whole bunch of hymns that are listed by numbers that are like that. The only one that is listed according to that particular number is St. Christopher on 216. Now, what are those numbers? Those numbers are actually the number of syllables in a line. So you actually have a 7-6. That it should be beneath the cross of Jesus, I fain would take my stand. And that is 8. Beneath the cross of Jesus, that's 7. I fain would take my stand, and that's 6. And then the next one would be the shadow of a mighty rock, that's 8. Within a weary land. Anyway, this is what is called the syllabic style. In other words, you've got now a composer who's going to look at that poem and assign a melody to it. He may compose it, or he may in fact assign a melody that actually has a similar breakdown according to the syllabic way that it is done. This particular one here is Frederick C. Maker, wrote this hymn. Particularly like this hymn because it's in D flat major, and that's just a wonderful key to me as a musician. I just think that it's just a wonderful key. But now Mr. Maker has composed a melody and harmonized it with really a wonderful harmony. It's very chromatic, that is to say that it uses notes that are not in the key of D flat major, but in fact they are little color tones. Chroma means color in Greek, and they're kind of color tones. So here's how it is harmonized, and I think that's part of the magic of the whole thing. And he's ended on an F chord, which is nowhere near a D flat major, but I got turned on to strange things. Since we will probably put these words up, perhaps on some kind of thing in this little presentation, well, then you're invited to sing along if you like. I won't do all 5 verses by any stretch of the imagination, but at any rate, here it is again. And if you would like to sing along, pick a verse and sing it. Just a few words, actually, about Frederick C. Maker. I don't have a lot of information yet about him. I do know that I do have a picture of where he worked, and I will try to put that up as well. These hymns are really kind of interesting because Wikipedia, for example, the author of the words, Elizabeth Clephane, approaches the whole thing through her poem in a very personal way. She is really talking about what the cross does for her as a person, and she really does not refer to the Savior who is on the cross or anything of that sort. She is concerned about the cross being her comfort. Now remember that she's actually ill. She's really has a kind of a frail constitution and is probably facing death herself as she gets closer to her own death than she has been in this particular poem. Wikipedia actually goes to all the elaborate effort to contrast this with an earlier poem, 160 years earlier, not the same words, of course, but an entirely different treatment of the cross, and it is by Isaac Watts, I believe, 1674 to 1748. And this, of course, is in our hymnal as well. When I survey the wondrous cross, 1707. However, in Isaac Watts' poem, it's something very different. He focuses not on the cross itself, but on Jesus and Jesus hanging on the cross. He approaches it theologically, whereas Clephane approaches this thing romantically. That is, in the Romantic period of Romantic literature, she is concerned with the personal relationship, actually with the cross. Isaac Watts actually is concerned with the saving grace of Jesus hanging on the cross and actually paying the price for humanity. He basically says, according to Wikipedia here, this is not just love and sorrow, but it is really rather something else. It is about nothing like this has ever happened in the history of the human race. Clephane's hymn is, of course, the encounter of a woman during the Romantic era of literature 160 years later, and it's very personal. And maybe that's why I like this particular hymn. It appeals to me in a very personal way. And by the way, some of this information, I didn't realize this, from Wikipedia, comes from a local guy, C. Michael Hahn, University Distinguished Professor of Church Music of the Perkins School of Theology at SMU. Well, that is all that I have for the moment. So I guess that is where I will say, stop.